Joining us now, Mandy Gunasekara, and Mandy is an expert on all things environmental, I will say, for sure. She was the former EPA Chief of Staff, Principal of Section 7 Strategies. Mandy, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So we wanted to talk to you also about these vaccine mandates. That is front and center.
Yeah.
And everybody's buzzing and talking about it. The governor was on Paul's show this morning talking about action the state of Mississippi has taken with regard to what many believe. I think you and I share the view. It's unconstitutional. It's gross overreach by the executive branch to demand and require a private business to institute such mandates. You know, from a business perspective, I had this conversation with Speaker Pro Tem of the Mississippi House, Jason White. Saw him at the game. But, you know, we got enough trouble in the private sector dealing with government regulations. I want them as little as possible in my boardroom and in my employee handbook. And this is just too much.
Yeah, I agree. It's extremely intrusive and unproductive. You know, it's not about the vaccine. It's about mandating a certain requirement that forces you as the owner of a business or employer to get into the personal health decisions of your employees in ways that prior to COVID was actually protected under things like HIPAA laws. And so there's probably a lot of questions that should be asked and answered in that context. But it's very inappropriate. And I fear it's going to push a lot more people away from considering whether or not something like the vaccine makes sense for them from a health perspective. But I do want to say, you know, the fact that there was a stay issued from the Fifth Circuit stopping this regulation in its tracks prior to it going into effect, one, that is a very big deal, but 2 or 3 days after it was officially issued is a testament to how much this violates constitutional principles that are protected. And just quick shout out to the Attorney General and her team for really being on the ball from Mississippi's perspective.
Yeah, it happened in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, I believe, right? Mm-hmm. And the challenge included Louisiana, Mississippi, Utah, and South Carolina, the way I read it.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, when we had Lucian on the program Friday, he made a reference to this grave danger concept. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of hard to justify this mandate on that basis when first you waited several months since you've been in office. The vaccines have been out for a long time.
Right.
And then second, you put this order out, you hand it over to OSHA. It takes them 2 months to come up with three inch high of guidance. And you're not going to implement it until sometime in January. That kind of conflicts with the concept of grave danger. I think about we got to do something now today.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it also fails to take into account all the additional therapeutics and other potential solutions that are out there.
Natural immunity,
all those aspects that, remember when we were talking about herd immunity early in this? You know, we never got a clear answer from when we would meet that threshold, but there seems to be a strong case for the number of Americans that have either had or been exposed to it. We are in a much better position that, in my opinion, again, caveat, I'm no OSHA expert, but meeting the threshold of grave danger, that should be something high and something serious. And based off the things you said and the range of other options that are out there, in my opinion, it doesn't meet that test.
Yeah, now we've got therapeutics with Merck and Pfizer coming out and saying they've got pills to address the situation with unbelievable results in their trials. So that too kind of I think kind of slaps in the face of this concept of grave danger. And, of course, the risk is what's next that you're going to deem as grave danger that you show up and say and issue this order, this broad order across the private sector like that.
Yeah, I mean, and you've got to look at this, the precedent it could set.
Yeah.
That's very important. You look at the proverbial slippery slope. It could get really bad for what the federal government could mandate private businesses to do that are extremely violative, again, of a personal health decision. It's a waste of resources for the employer to have to deal with the complexities of a rule and regulation like this, and it just creates a lot of unnecessary unnecessary pressure on that relationship. And to have a good business, typically you want to get along well and have a good relationship with the employee,
sure.
the employee and the employer. And so it's just, again, a major intrusion. I think it's going to prove to be ineffective, but I'm not surprised. This probably will not be, and it actually hasn't been, the only federal administrative agency wanting to do something that extends well beyond its congressionally mandated authority. We're seeing that from places like EPA, from other federal agencies, and OSHA's response to COVID and this vaccine mandate is just the latest example of overreach from a Democratic administration that wants to use the arm of the federal government to coerce the American people to do things that may not be in their best interest.
Yeah, and the premise of the OSHA Act and creating OSHA, I think about, acid spills and slippery floors and needing a hard hat because there's heavy equipment moving stuff around. This really kind of extends that to I think, an area where it's just reaching for straws, honestly. Well, we can say that if you're not vaccinated, that causes a safety problem in the workplace. But from a practical perspective, anybody in this country that wants a vaccine can get it for the asking.
Yeah.
It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's a matter of risk tolerance. Mm-hmm. You make a choice. I accept the risk of taking the vaccine. I'm good with that. Folks say I accept the risk of not taking the vaccine. So those who are not vaccinated, they shouldn't be posing a threat, a safety threat to anybody ostensibly other than those who are not vaccinated who have already made that decision. This isn't a place for government. That's
right. It's a principle of freedom, and there's some people who will say, like the president, this is not a matter of liberty. If you hear an official from the federal government saying this is not a matter of liberty, it is in fact a matter of liberty.
Always.
It always is. It also, I would say this, it degrades the fulfillment of the mission of an entity like OSHA. You're right. There is a real legitimate purpose for OSHA to exist, and they do keep a large part of the workforce safe because of smart, balanced, justifiable regulations they've put in place. But this is not one of those instances. And I think just the fact that you have a stay so quickly, I imagine more will occur in other courts where they have been issued. And the good news is there is a formidable defense that is in motion because people have stood up and said, we will not be coerced by this government. We will not just sit by and let someone like President Biden and his political officials interfere with private businesses and interfere with people's personal health decisions.
Darren on the C Spire text line. I work for a Fortune 500 company, and we had a teleconference about vaccination mandates, and our lawyer said they aren't going to mandate, and they're waiting to see what SCOTUS says. So it does seem to be like where we're headed. Do you feel, to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I think so. It is certainly a matter of national interest, and rises to that level of where is that line between giving the general public tools to deal with a national issue, but respecting principles of freedom and individual rights in the process. And I would say over the past 18 months that we've been dealing with COVID, there has been an expansion of the gray area between what is that line where principles of freedom and individual choices are not only respected but protected by the federal government, and then what will they come in and will they push back on and try to intrude?
Did I hear correctly, this is Kevin in Monticello, that Congress is exempt from the vaccination mandate? You and I were talking about that offline. It's just a matter of the scope of authority the executive branch has. You want to explain that?
Yeah, that's right. So these are administrative agencies. They're an arm of the executive branch, and so this is a product of separation of powers. And federal government, or the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, are exempt from a fair amount of federal laws that would otherwise apply in employer-employee relationships, including the type of questions that someone can ask in an interview process. There's a lower threshold of protection if you're a staffer going on to work on Capitol Hill. So if it were to be implemented, it would have to be done through the legislative approach process.
Yeah, I get that. We got a break right here. We'll come back. We want to talk a little bit more about this, and also the EPA's handling or mishandling, potentially, of the Yazoo Pump project here in Mississippi. Stay with us. We'll be right back on Middays. boys, Gerard and Rhino, Mandy Gunasekara in the studio. So on the C Spire text line, that's pretty good there, isn't it? On the 662 from Gladiator, likening, what was his name? The prince that, I don't know what the hell it was. They became Caesar with the thumbs down.
It was played by River Phoenix's brother, Joaquin Phoenix. I can't think of his name, though.
I can't either. But it's a little, anyhow, it's a little
The
gift.
son of Marcus Aurelius that became
it.
Caesar. I don't remember his name.
Which thumb down.
Was it Commodus?
Maybe that's it. I don't know. We're struggling to remember that.
It's been a minute since I've seen Gladiator.
Me too. That's right. That's Biden. Thumbs down. That's pretty awesome. Jason, it is overreaching. I'm all for vaccines and mandates when done correctly through private businesses, military, or local communities and through legitimate legislation, but one guy shouldn't be able to force the entire country's workforce to do anything. It just stinks. So I think I'm in agreement. Mandy, what do you think?
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree. I agree. And especially in an instance where there's still a lot of questions out there that matter. When you make these sorts of decisions, a matter of public policy or public health, you have to weigh pros and cons. And we as the American public have never gotten the clear outcome of those seemingly analyses from CDC and other health-related agencies. So, look, I agree. Just one person mandating this type of action in such an expansive and questionable manner is very problematic.
Yeah. And again, it's the old slippery slope. Well, see, that one went through and the Supreme Court upheld it. I can do anything. I mean, I hearken back to the Obama. I got a pen and a phone when he got all mad because he lost the control in the Congress. Well, I got a pen and a phone since they're not getting my agenda through there because this guy would do anything and everything he could independent of the Congress in this case. And I don't understand the sort of dying on this hill. Because there are a lot of scientists who say they think the worst is behind us. We're coming out of this. Just let it run its course. Again, these vaccines have been out there for months. You want one, get it. If you don't, don't. It's just, live your life. It's time to just get back to normal, get government out of the way. I don't see what this accomplishes.
Well, for the Democrat Party and under the Biden agenda, it accomplishes a justification for them to control your life in the way that they want to. You see that they will try to use any complicated issue or crisis to effectuate that outcome. They'll do it with climate change. They'll do it with the border crisis, with immigration and whatnot. So they try to use those type of examples that are very real issues, but use it as a means to justify expansive action that interferes with the day-to-day lives of American citizens, and that's just not the way it's supposed to work.
Carol in Starkville says it's about giving government more control of public, not public safety. Said that before you made the same observation.
That's right.
Said amen, sister. So I agree. This is really it's the hubris of the left, which believes we're all stupid. We don't know anything. We've got to run your life cradle to grave. And to a great extent, they try to buy us off with all these government programs and this helicopter money so that we'll essentially cave and capitulate to the agenda, thus conferring them more power.
Yeah, if they can convince you your life is in peril and the only people who can save it is the federal government, you may be more willing to hand over freedoms you are otherwise you have inherited by being born in this country and being an American citizen. And so that's what they're trying to do. I think the good news is the American people today they see this. They are willing to fight back in the court system, holding legislators accountable, calling into offices. And I think that's going to be very important because, we just saw the passage of this $1 trillion infrastructure bill. The next thing on the dais, so to speak, in the U.S. Congress is the Build Back Better plan, which is very problematic from both a spending and trying to pay people for their votes and pay people for a willingness to give up freedoms that we have enjoyed up until this point.
Yeah, and just as Stephen Moore said earlier, save America, kill the bill. It's just gross, broad overreach that we just can't let get through. I'm just sorry that Republicans got on board on this infrastructure bill, which I think does give them greater leverage in pushing through this bigger measure, which is I think would just be produce really bad outcomes for Americans in the way that's headed. All right, so let's talk about these pumps, the Yazoo pump.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. I know you know a lot about that, having been chief of staff of the EPA, and you've tracked that somewhat. This is something Mississippians have been waiting to see some relief on for some time.
For decades.
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing if you hear the whole story of finishing the pumps has almost been over the finish line, and then something seemingly crazy and out of left field came and quashed it at the very last minute. But it is. To sum it up, I struggle to sum it up because there's so much that we've discussed, and there's so many complexities to it. But it's about finishing an Army Corps project that started a long time ago, and they basically built this whole drainage system. And you need to put the plug, a plug or lifting of the plug in the bathtub, and they've not yet finished that in this whole system. And so the effect of that is disastrous flooding in certain instances that we know will occur, and that ruining the lives and the livelihoods of the people out there in the Delta region. And so what we've seen most recently, it was an E&E news story where a letter from Congressman Benny Thompson basically sent to EPA Administrator Michael Regan, asking him to look into how the process went down of EPA in a technical role, approving of some of the environmental assessments and analysis from the Army Corps, which is really important for getting this project finished and over the finish line. Now, before you ask me how I respond to that, I will respond to that by saying, look, there is always a range of opinions, and even from a science perspective, a range of scientific perspectives when you're dealing with any project at U.S. EPA, whether on the regional level or national. But I will say that the process we adhered to in terms of working with the U.S. Army Corps, listening to the range of different offices at U.S. EPA, it was absolutely above board. And the conclusion was, yes, this project needs to move forward. If you look at the pros and cons of what needs to happen to create a balance in this area that has not existed for decades, you can't get to any sort of outcome other than approving the project as it currently exists. And it's important to note, too, from previous proposals, there were a fair amount of substantive changes that occurred, the location of it, some of the wildlife mitigation, so balancing impacts that we know will occur, making sure that you do things to limit that negative impact on some of the wildlife. All of that has changed in a way to where, on the balance, it makes sense for this to absolutely get done to prevent harm to the people and to prevent unnecessary harm to the wildlife out there as well.
Well, this I kind of regard as a necessary and wise investment from an infrastructure perspective. I mean, this is true needed infrastructure. This does fall under the scope of government to address. This is not cronied up, wasted, back-scratching stuff. This is just real that needs to happen.
Yeah, and I would say this. When we were at U.S. EPA, we had a regional administrator go out to the region and talk to the communities impacted by this. And that was the first time someone from the federal government had actually come to talk to them, which was an eye-opening experience for some of the career people who had been working on this at EPA for years, and then certainly a justification for the community that people who were in positions of influence in dictating the outcome of this project, that they were actually listening. And so that was an about-face from how this project had been handled leading up to when the U.S. EPA regional administrator and team went out there. I would just urge, I know that the EPA is doing a tour through the South, coming through Jackson, Mississippi. It would behoove them to go out to the area and talk to that community and listen to the people who have had to deal with this for far too long.
Yeah, I mean, what a novel idea. Go into the trenches, into the field, and visit with the people who were impacted by this. So, well, hopefully we'll get resolution. Something else I wanted to share with you, we talked about a little bit on the break with respect to the vaccine mandates, is that it appears that Big Bird got his Pfizer shot. and the conservatives are calling it propaganda. Mandy, do kids need to be seeing tweets from Big Bird and messages from Big Bird about getting a Pfizer shot?
No, I don't. Look, no childhood icon will convince my kids that they need to get a shot. And it's frustrating because what's off limits, and two, it's not going to work.
Let them be kids, man.
Exactly.
Good grief. I got the COVID vaccine today, says Big Bird. My wing is feeling a little sore, but it'll give my body an extra protective boost that keeps me and others healthy. Oh, it's just unbelievable. We'll take a break right here. Thanks, Mandy, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Talk soon. We'll take a break. More talk. Foreigner tickets. Stay with